Hi, everyone. Good morning. We have just started the broadcast and we'll give it maybe a minute or a couple of minutes for more participants to join in. And then we'll quickly get started with the panel. So Rajiv, Sukhmeet, I hope you're able to hear me well.
Yes, I can hear you well, Anirban.
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv.
Yes, Anirban. Am I audible too?
Yeah, you are audible as well. So I think the participants have started joining in, and we are just about cross 12. So maybe we'll quickly get started. So hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. I am Anirban, CRO for Mercer Metal, and I'm joined today by Rajiv, who's the Global Head of Human Resources at Infogain, and my colleague Sukhmeet, who is a Senior Principal at Mercer, and also leads the career and the M&A consulting businesses in India. So welcome, Rajiv, Sukhmeet. It's really a pleasure to have you with us today. Um, So today, we wanted to discuss the impact of COVID on organizations, and specifically on HR functions like talent acquisition, like learning and development, and what organizations can and rather are doing, to make these processes more resilient, in times of COVID. And as we go along, we will touch upon certain challenges, we'll touch upon best practices, and some real life implementations as well, right? In the course of discussion. A quick pieces of information for all of us in the audience. So you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat box that you see in Zoom. We'll definitely like to know you better. If you have any questions, during the discussion, please post them in the Q&A section, which you should see in the Zoom window. I promise we'll make sure that we keep time at the end so that we're able to answer or get to some of those questions. Um, and also to keep this session a bit more interactive, a bit more engaging, we've actually kept a couple of polls where you would need to vote on a few topics, and I'll sound you off at the with appropriate time, when this needs to be done to guide the discussion, right? So let's jump right into the topic. The COVID phenomena, I think, has been with us for a while now, and we are frankly overloaded with information and also misinformation at times. All over the internet, right? So to cut the clutter here, let me first turn to you, Sukhmeet, on your view about the real impact, that COVID is having in the business landscape.
Thanks, Anirban, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be part of this session. I think all of us are struggling to deal with COVID, and we're talking about three challenges. It's a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, and a digital crisis for most of the companies, right? And it's going to set new ways of working. None of us have seen this before. So it's a challenge for all of us. And how leaders really respond to the situation will have a long-term impact on the businesses, on their employees, right from engagement to productivity to their commitment. I think organizations are struggling to balance economics and empathy, right? Mercer has been running COVID pulse surveys right from March, and we're looking at how data is changing over a period of time. Organizations are obviously responding very differently depending on the impact on their industry and their own financial health. On one side, we have massive layoffs. Today, CMI has reported 1 out of 4 employees are getting unemployed. Right? There is salary freeze, promotions are getting deferred, bonuses are getting impacted, pay cuts. And on the other side, you have some companies setting up COVID funds to manage impacted employees, right? They are running multiple programs to deal with physical, emotional, and social well-being of employees. Employees are struggling to manage the work-life balance, right? And the entire stress around it. There are companies who are paying advanced salaries to factory workers. There are companies who are paying additional allowances or additional base pay up to even 25% in the months of April and May for all the hardship that they're going through or for the additional effort that they're putting in to deal with business continuity, to manage business continuity. Right? And if I pick up specifically the data points from the third COVID Pulse survey that closed around April end, we see that nearly 70% of the organizations have actually deferred or suspended their hiring schedule. Right? And even if the ones who are going ahead with it are actually struggling with the headcount budgets. So they're either going down or they're looking at replacement hires. Right? Fortunately, some sectors, there is some silver lining. So companies in IT, ITS, consumer goods, pharma, healthcare are seeing a lesser impact in terms of their hiring schedule. Nearly 40% of the companies have deferred the onboarding of new hires. And a lot of it is also happening virtually. Right? If I look at investments on T&D side, nearly half the companies have reported data that they're going to cut down or limit their L&D expenses. So definitely companies are struggling to deal with the entire fallout. But I also see this as a huge opportunity, right? An opportunity for HR to rise to the occasion and do more with less. You can look at better technology adoption, fasten the pace of all the changes that you really wanted, right? Flexible working, etc. So I think it's important for HR fraternity to help the companies navigate this crisis. I recently came across the quote from the global CHR of IBM, who said that in the last crisis, it was the CFOs and the finance folks who were navigating the crisis. And now it's HR and the CHROs who are supposed to do that. So that's the macro picture, Anirban, that we are hearing from our clients.
Sure, sure. In fact, from a Mercer Metal standpoint, where we are typically helping organizations with online assessments around talent acquisition, around learning and development, or even engagement, we are seeing businesses rethinking four critical aspects. The first is, to do with the process itself. So there has been, enough amount of process reengineering that's happening, within the talent acquisition and the L&D organizations, where companies are leaning towards more and more contactless processes, right, which are scalable. And this, in some sense, is also fast tracking the adoption of technology, I think, which Sukhmeet mentioned as well. But that's the first prong, which is a redefinition and the reengineering of the existing processes, within the HR organization. The second aspect is around skills. And I think this is a time, when organizations are going through a phase of discovery, to understand that what skills will be relevant in the new normal, right? So a lot of the existing competency frameworks, whether it is around technical, whether it is around behavioral, that's getting adjusted and adapted, as we speak. And we will cover, maybe talk about it in a bit more detail later in the conversation. But skills is again the second most important area where we see organizations, rethinking their existing skill banks and repositories. The third is around an entire paradigm, which centers around engagement. Now, as you can understand, adapting the engagement strategies, especially in view of now people working remotely, now communication being an integral part of, I think HR, um, where no amount of communication is actually over communication, right? You really cannot over communicate in this scenario, and you really cannot over engage, your workforce. So engagement as a paradigm is being completely thought through and revamped and adjusted, in times of COVID. And fourth, and the most important aspect, of course, is around the cost structures. So this is the time, when it's time to run maybe a lean and a mean machine, as organizations put it. But this is also the ideal time when organizations are rethinking their cost structures. And there is also enough support for innovations. If you look at it, is not only at a corporate level, but also at a government, also at a policy level. There is more and more push towards innovations, which are cost efficient, and which can sustain some of the existing processes within organizations. So I think these four parameters is what we see in our clients or the relationships that we manage, emerging as key areas when companies are rethinking their strategies because of COVID. So Rajiv, what are your views on this?
Thank you, Anirban. Thanks, Sukhmeet, for setting the context. Good afternoon, everybody. I think, I would actually pick the thread which Sukhmeet brought in at the beginning, that this is a time, actually, it's an unprecedented times for all of us. He talked about three elements of impact, which we are seeing, starting from health, economic, and also digital challenges. And, when Sukhmeet, you close, you talked about the IBM CHRO's quote, uh, which is rightfully so that CHROs started taking lead because the health and safety came to play. But I think the way we are moving in from an overall economic scenario perspective, again, the CFOs are going to be taking lead there because the impact is going to be much bigger for the survival beyond the life from an economic survival perspective. So, in my perspective, Anirban, if I were to look at this, as I mentioned, it's an unprecedented time for all of us. All of a sudden, we were encountered a situation of being remote from our workplaces. We had no choice but to go remote immediately. It was a matter of days in which companies had to take that call and they started going work from home. If I look at it from entire HR organization, people organization perspective, we had to make that work for everybody. And if I narrow it down from L&D perspective, for L&D, we had a bigger challenge because if I just look at my L&D channels from a learning channels perspective, till last year, not more than 40 to 50% of our learning deliveries were happening through virtual channels. And all of a sudden, the expectation was we were to move it to 100%. It was not, we were not prepared for this as a function. There were challenges of all sorts, including readiness to take everything virtual, facilitators' preparedness, participants' engagement was to be ensured, assignments and assessments were to be managed virtually. And if I were to give you practical experiences and examples here for the benefit of everybody in terms of how did we navigate this entire journey from a L&D perspective, the first thing which we did was we looked at our learning modules and we said, let's redraft them to ensure that these are suiting to the virtual requirements or not. And that was our starting point. And second thing which we did was we looked at the duration of our training modules. Imagine, when you are sitting in a classroom, everybody is compelled to have an attention, even if, it is physical attention. And mentally, everybody could go and wander wherever they want to. But in a virtual way, how can you actually keep the attention of your participants all the time with you as a facilitator? So we said, let's not do any session more than 2 hours at a stretch. And we have broken sessions and modules like that. And at the same time, we also kind of revisited the modules to make it in a way that it caters to the capsule-based learning and also creates that impact which is expected from it. So these were the changes we got into. The third important change we got into this process was we oriented our facilitator also. He said that it's a big change for you. So far, you were prepared to deal with facilitation in a different way. Right now, you're going to be dealing with people who are virtually sitting in different locations. So the most important thing is that what is your understanding about the change? Being empathetic to this entire understanding and also appreciating the fact that people are going to be sitting at their home. They'll have family around, kids around. They may have connectivity issues. Starting from there to the perspective of how would you now manage your hooks? It won't work the way it used to work in the past. How would you encourage your people to participate and to remain engaged in the overall journey? Encourage video conversations, including finding your own spot, which is noise-free spot for training session. So these were the some of the orientation we got into from a facilitation perspective. The fourth important thing was we realized that everybody has a different learning need. Instead of just going with a WebEx based learning, can we also create opportunities from a self-paced learning offerings point of view? And we created those modules for people. So there are certain employees who like to go with self-paced ways. There are certain employees who would like to actually go with webinar-based and a flagship intervention-based learning programs. In fact, we were to also change our we were to adopt one of the flagship interventions which we had not defined earlier. In IT industry, the typical problem is when people are not into the build assignments, they come to the bench. And bench is a place which is without work, just in case if any of the participants is not from IT industry. So how do you now engage them? They're sitting at home. They want to be engaged because you're paying salaries to them. You also need to, at the same time, prepare them for a future deployability perspective. So we created learning framework for all the employees who were sitting on the bench based on their technologies and practices. The other thing we looked at was our virtual assessment, because we had no other choice but to leverage our tools for online assessments, adopting assignment-based assessments for the people. Now, in the entire process of this change, if I were to share the silver lining from a people perspective, I think people adopted to this change faster than I expected them to adopt.
Yeah.
The response which we have got from them is really very good. They're very, I get to hear from team that the dropout ratios are lesser. People are attending the sessions in numbers or more than what we used to observe in the past. They're also have become more responsive to the learning needs and also responding to training function. So these are the positive things which I have observed. So let me take a pause here and come back to the further discussion, Anirban.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it really makes sense, because I think the impact is, at all levels, right from trainers to facilitators to the participants, and it's impacting multiple areas in the organizations, in a way that we have never experienced before. So great to hear those perspectives. I think, let's maybe turn the focus of the discussion to understand that what are the key challenges, which we feel are there, from a talent management standpoint, right from acquisition to training to engagement. I think Rajiv, you spoke about L&D to a certain extent. And this is where, we would like to quickly introduce a poll, for our audience. So Ankur, I believe you'd have already enabled the poll for the audience. Um, so where we would want to see that what are your views as to what are the key challenges or what are the most important challenges which you believe uh, your organization faces as of today. And then maybe we can try and address some of that, share our views, as we move along. So we'll take maybe a quick pause of 30 seconds here to see that which of these, come up as the most important areas. Sukhmeet, any guesses? What do you think will be the top, parameter here?
I think the first one, because short-term perspective will be looked at more than a future perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Rajiv, any guesses?
I think the first one, managing and engaging remote workforce, because it's a change process. Unless we mature it, till then it will remain to be the biggest challenge for us.
Sure, sure. So let's wait out and see, what does the audience feel, and then maybe we can, share our perspectives. I still don't see the results, of it. Um, so I believe, guys, you are voting, for this poll. It will really help guide the, flow of the discussion. So we'll maybe give it another 15, 20 seconds and then announce the results of the poll. Okay, so I think we are ending the poll right now. What are the results? Oh, fantastic. So the panelists were spot on, right? So I think it's the first challenge, which is being highlighted by everyone, regarding managing and engaging the remote workforce, which takes center stage. But nevertheless, I think the other parameters score as well. So I think, Sukhmeet, over to you, to understand your views on reskilling and the broader impact of COVID.
Yeah, I definitely think the second one is very, very important, right? Today, companies are being forced to re-examine the business models. The ask from managers and leaders is becoming higher and higher. You have to embrace digital solutions. You have to look at new ways of working, look at business model innovation. So, what new skills are becoming more relevant? I would say business innovation, adaptability, agility, driving change, digital readiness, learnability. Some of this was anyway happening, but I would say that given the current environment, the relevance of these is becoming more and more organizations are warming up to this, right? And even if you look at the pre-COVID era, there were organizations who were undergoing transformations and focusing on reskilling to prepare for the future. We have been working with a large manufacturing organization. So it's a legacy organization, 50 plus years in existence, and a market leader in its segment with a group turnover of more than 10,000 crores, right? And they were undergoing a significant digital transformation, automating the plants, deploying new technology for production, looking at ERP systems across multiple functions. They're deploying robots on the shop floor. Now imagine the massive impact on structure, roles, and skills. Right? While we're helping them with roles and the structures and what kind of headcount is required, we're also identifying for the new roles what kind of skills are required, both technical and the soft skills, right? And what are going to be the gaps, where is their workforce today, and how will they get trained over the next 2 years to deliver on what is really required. I would say that this future of work strategies are no longer about competitive advantage. They're more about existential need today. Right? We at Mercer have been doing a global talent trend study every year. And if I look at the India report that got released last month, which is based on 500 plus voices across C-suite and HR leaders, the number one concern has been has been people reskilling, right? Executives believe that reskilling is the number one investment that will give them the biggest ROI in the future. It's not easy. I think companies are struggling with this. I think the biggest challenge, which almost 50% of the companies reported, was how do you measure the gaps, which implies two things, right? Not knowing what skills are required for the future. And second is, even if you know those skills, how do you actually measure those gaps? A lot many companies said, or other executives, almost 40% of the executives said that they don't believe that their workforce is ready for this entire change and this entire reskilling. While employees want to change, and more than 80% of employees say that they are willing to change, but executives don't have that kind of faith that their organizations can really change, right? So they're adopting build, buy, borrow, and even bot strategies. Right? A lot many companies are saying, nearly 57% of the companies said that what if the reskilled talent leaves? That's a barrier for me. But the counter question is, if you don't reskill, what does this mean for you? How much deadwood are you going to really carry? Right? Companies are also saying it's very expensive. If I look at the data, of course, it's pre-COVID data. Nearly 45 to 50,000 rupees per person is being spent in India on an average on reskilling. And this compares to almost 1 lakh to 1.4 lakhs in the developed market. And even if you look at Middle East and China, they're spending much more than India. Right? So skilling is important. The focus is becoming more and more. I would say that given the impact on jobs and economy, we need to move the needle much faster now. That would be my view on skilling, Anirban.
Sure, sure. I think let me, try and attack the first point in the poll, which centers typically around engagement, right? And I spoke briefly about engagement as one of the key areas, right, where businesses are trying to adapt to these changing times. And of course, this engagement is an issue today at multiple levels within the organization. So I think on one end, there is a struggle to keep your current employees engaged, right? And then you also need to engage your fresh hires, interns in several cases, in the absence of a very smooth onboarding process. Um, so I think what organizations are doing here, and in our experience, we are looking, or what we are experiencing, in our conversations, is that they're looking out for innovative and virtual solutions like hackathons, like ideathons, where people can actually collaborate virtually and solve problems or build solutions, right? And often, some of these aspects around hackathons or ideathons, where you're actually building a solution or solving a problem, in a collaborative fashion, can also be integrated with maybe your social media hooks. It can come equipped with maybe a leaderboard that gets updated on a real-time basis. But these are all means to foster engagement virtually, in a target population, which does not have access to the pre-COVID intricate physical onboarding or engagement tools today, right? So I think that's one key area. And in fact, in one of the very recent examples where we worked with, one of the largest cloud service providers globally, we had them actually run a hackathon to engage the interns which they had already hired. Now, what we need to understand there, the onboarding process which would have existed before typically do not exist now because there are no physical, contact points. But what they did was, they actually created or formed teams of 5 people and asked them to solve challenges, most of which was relevant to the organization, right? So in that way, it sort of ensured inclusion, it sort of ensured better participation. And at the end of it, the organization was also able to mine some very good ideas, which um, uh, would have impacted them positively, in these times. So it sat very well with the participants and the organizers alike, and it really made up for the absence of this intricate, physical onboarding process before. So I think that's one, which we are seeing being adopted increasingly, by organizations. But this entire scenario around hackathons, which I talked about, or any contactless process for that matter, around training, around learning and development, ultimately boils down, to the right technology platforms that are being used. And I think we are all emphasizing that this is the time when we are experiencing something called maybe flight to remote. That's the term, we have sort of coined for it. But organizations are in a rush to maybe take most of their learning processes, assessment processes, content delivery, facilitation, onboarding, all of that online, all of that virtual. But what we need to remember is, it needs to be guided by some principles, right, to make this effective at the end of the day. And especially if you are taking some of the high stake scenarios like assessments online, then there are certain things which we really need to look at before embarking on this, completely virtual or completely online, mode of doing things. So I'll just lay out a few pointers which in our experience, should be top of mind. One, we need to ensure that whether the platforms or technology that we are banking on, um, does this function at scale under varying conditions, right? We cannot escape the fact that in India, we can have a wide range and a huge variety when it comes to internet speeds, the bandwidth available, the existence of controlled environments, so noise-free environments and all of that. So does your platform or technology work seamlessly across all of these conditions? So that's one thing to look out for. Two, uh, see the process, or merely transforming an offline process into online should not be an excuse for a degradation in candidate experience or participant experience. So whichever platform or whichever technology we are banking on, does it at least preserve, or in the best case, does it enhance the candidate experience of participating in talent acquisition or a learning and development or maybe an engagement process? I think that's what needs to be thought through. So at Mercer Metal, we typically encourage organizations, if you are migrating some of the offline processes, for example, take a case study interview, which you might do in your recruitment. If you are moving that online, try and make it more engaging. Try and use simulators where available. Try and use games where available, which are based on the case study, so that the candidate experience is not compromised. I think that's one key area, I think, which we really need to keep in mind. Third, Can the platform weed out any cases where candidates are trying to misuse the system? Now, all of us know, at least in the context of assessments, if you're rolling out assessments for an L&D or a talent acquisition use case remotely, there are candidates, who try to, beat the system, who try to misuse it, try to employ unfair means to wiggle through the sanctity of an assessment. So, does the platform provide adequate checks and balances to ensure credibility of whatever you are doing online, and makes it equivalent to your offline scenarios or the old normal scenarios, so to say? So that's, I think, again, a primary construct that we should look at. And finally, it also boils down to the easiness, or how easily, the platform or the technology itself can be adopted. Does it integrate with your existing systems? Can you actually go online with a click of a few buttons and avoid a very elaborate integration and a setup process? Um, because I think time is crucial. Because I think we heard Rajiv mention that within a span of few days, you had to migrate entire processes online. So if there is a whole elaborate process behind doing that, it simply does not work in these scenarios. So I think these are the key factors we should definitely be cognizant of while we are onboarding any technology platform, to enable things like hackathons or even remote or virtual assessments, engagement, learning and development initiatives. So this is where, I wanted to take a quick pause and make you all realize that, in the center of all of this, so we are talking technology, we are talking new processes, but at the center of all of this, it's still humans, who are having to manage this show. So let me turn to Rajiv again to understand how we as individuals, Rajiv, or organizations, how can we mitigate some of these challenges?
Sure. Thank you, Anirban. I think the fact of the matter is, you rightly said, at the end, at the center of this entire change is the people of the organization, right? From a corporate context perspective. Let's understand the situation from an employee's perspective in the current context. The fact of the matter is they're locked up at home. They have fear of COVID-19. Nobody wants to be positive about it. They want to continue to remain negative. They have fear of losing job. Now, if this is a context where their word has got confided in a small location, they have a fear of stepping out. They have fear of their survival from a life perspective. They have a fear of their continuity of employment. Now, how can we help them? And I think that's where all of us as HR professionals need to look at it from a multi-dimensional point of view. The number one important thing in my view is definitely when people are now, as the lockdown is opening up, people are coming back in some numbers in some industries. But since I come from IT industry where we have not even seen companies opening up and letting people come back to the office. So our biggest challenge is, other than ensuring the safety of our employees at this, while ensuring the productivity to customers also is not impacted, what are the things which we need to get into from HR perspective? And I think the most important thing for any HR professional would be to make oneself available and build connect with the people. This is a time when we need to actually remain connected with our employees. We need to check with them, just pick up the call, ping them, have a quick virtual interaction with them, understanding how are they feeling. In fact, within Infogain, last month itself in April, we actually covered more than 40% of our population, which is a sizable number from India population perspective. We are 3,000 plus in India. We reached out to 40% of the population through our business HR to understand how were they feeling and how the change is working out for them. And that's very important because people, this is a time when organizations need to convey to people that we are thinking about them. We are trying to understand how this change is working out for them. At the same time, I know there are business pressing needs. We need to be careful about how would this take a turn in terms of overall economic scenario for industries like us. The second important thing is, how can we leverage our internal tools and systems if you have a collaborative platform? So for example, in our own case, we have a workplace for our collaboration and communication purposes. And we are ensuring that every day there's some engagement activity happening, either in a form of some communication going to employees, or there's some activity which is happening in which we are actually connecting their family at work. We have people posting about their experiences what has been the different things they what have been the different things where they have got into beyond their work, how they are managing this entire change with their family members. So they have been posting about those stories, they're sharing those pictures. That is creating a lot of motivation and encouragement to people who are finding this change to be a psychological impact for them. And at the same time, at every stage, how can we be more resilient and empathetic to our employees? I think we need to listen to them at this stage. I understand people may become unreasonable sometimes, but that's not caused because of something else. The current situation possibly may be causing a little bit of difficulty for them. At the same time, from communication perspective, I think involve them in decision making, or at least enroll them in the right perspective, what's happening in the organization context, so that they continue to feel belonged and involved. Uh, these are some of the things I think one should be looking at from people's interest perspective. And I'm not actually touching the business impact side of it right now because that's not the context of this discussion. So I'll limit it here on Irvin and pass it back to you.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Rajiv. I think we have spoken among the three of us on the challenges, and we have felt the pulse of the audience also, to so to say. Um, but let's move on to what are some of the best practices which we are seeing emerge in these times, and how some of these are being implemented in organizations. So I think, Rajiv, we have a first-hand experience of maybe implementing a lot of these initiatives within the organization to ensure continuity. So I think while we speak about that, but it'll be good to again maybe initiate a poll. As I said, the second poll and the last one, in this discussion, that as business leaders, what is the business priority that you have, during these times, or what is it that you are hearing from your organizations, right? So give us a view to that. So maybe we'll take a quick pause of about 30 seconds or so here to capture your views, and then move ahead in the discussion. So please use Zoom to vote in this poll. So Rajiv, we were right the last time. Coming back to you again. So which do you think will be the top scorer here?
Sorry, I was on mute. I would actually rate second, um, and then I'll go to point one. So
Okay,
both are very close, but second should be the most important one, I believe.
sure. And your view, Sukhmeet?
Second one.
Second is it? Okay. So I think panelists feel that it should be the second one. Let's see, how close are we to the audience? I think some of you are responding over chat with the option. If you can just use the polling option, which is there at the center, I think you should see it at the bottom of your screen. Just use that option to check the answers that you want. All right, right again. So I think so we are all on the same boat, right? So I think that sort of proves that we are facing similar kinds of challenges. But Rajiv, I really want to come back to you, but to
Sure.
understand that how you are addressing some of these challenges or implementing some of these best practices within InfoGain, and what has been your experience thus far.
Sure. So I'll actually go back to my, when I was responding to the first context in terms of this entire situation. You know, it all started before we went remote, right? And from that time till now, we have covered a lot of ground. So, for example, the first important thing was for us, from a business continuity perspective, was to ensure that all our employees are productive even when they go remote. And a step before that was they are all safe and healthy. when they are working at the office premise. So we had to adopt a lot of basic health and hygiene process in the organization. At the same time, as part of the business continuity readiness perspective, we kind of rolled out global work from home policy for the first time, and also defined what are the enablers for employees in terms of do's and don'ts, so that they could understand how to actually conduct themselves, because it was a change for them. They were requiring a lot of handholding from this new normal perspective. The entire HR organization, including L&D, talent acquisition, HR core function, all of them had to revisit their processes. So for example, when I talk about the central core HR function, the entire onboarding went virtual, which was never the case. Nobody in the team would have ever imagined that they will actually manage the entire paper process online. They would get the bank account opening process online. A lot of hurdles were there in terms of various processes, but at the end we were able to manage that. So this entire process went online. L&D I talked about in terms of going 100% remote, virtual rather. Talent acquisition process went virtual completely. So all of that got into the shape as part of this preparedness for remote working. Now, third important thing, when we got into the remote context, we realized that we had this people-related challenges in terms of their readiness to cope up with this change. While I appreciate all our employees that they demonstrated high amount of adaptability to this change, but at the same time, when we were connecting with them, we learned that they have some challenge which is related to either adapting to this new normal from their work and life perspective, including family. And they had, some of these people complained about stressed hours because most of the time they were glued to the workstation, attending calls, similar to what we are doing right now. So we said, let's do some of the things which are very essential and critical for them, which will enable their perspective to deal with the situation. And from L&D perspective, we came up with some of the programs. These programs were timed only during April month, and we want to continue with them because we got really good feedback from people, and these have been helping them. So one of the programs was stress management. The other one was time management while being on work from home, change management during work from home, remote team management for managers, because we wanted them to know how to conduct themselves. As part of the Scrum meeting, we have two calls every day, one in the morning, one at the evening. But then how do you actually conduct yourself in those calls was very important to be sensitized on to all of them. So remote team management, managing change during disruptive times, work-life balance, these were some of the programs where we got into in terms of bringing about these changes for the people. At the same time, we also leverage our workplace platform, which is social collaborative platform, to introduce bite-sized learning and push it through that platform, where the objective was to provide daily nuggets to employees so that they understand some of the perspectives as a best practices for them to adopt. Some of it was related to motivational, inspirational quotes. Some of it was related to the wellness, physical health and well-being, stress management, time management. And also what we did was we came up with 101 productivity series of work from home. So every day we send one of it so that people pick something new and become more effective and also efficient while being at work from home. In addition to this, we have also found the silver lining. Again, everywhere you'll always find something positive. We have 4 different centers within India. We are in Noida, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Pune. And when we used to do our onboarding orientation, we used to do it locally mostly, and there would be certain videos. This time we got the opportunity to standardize that and create the same experience as we would create in Noida, which is the India's biggest center for us, and where the most of the leadership would be sitting from India perspective. And that brought in a lot of consistency for us. So, those are the positive changes. Now we are delivering the same experience and same information to employees irrespective of the geography. And now, some of the things we are doing at global level also. I talked about the learning models which we changed, and also the way we are providing services to people and offering self-paced learning versus WebEx-based learning. The corporate pool learning was a big change which we brought in because their engagement was very, very important. So these are some of the things from learning and development perspective. From HR point of view, as I said, the engagement has been the focus. Social collaborative platform is leveraged. We are doing 101 on a regular basis. All our processes have gone online, and so that way we have dealt with this change so far. There are certain issues we face now for HR organization. We are seeing that people are really putting in a lot of hours than they used to. So sometimes there's a complaint about that for us. People are working more on spreadsheet and presentations most of the times. These are some of the challenges which would be common, I believe, for everybody in the IT industry. But otherwise, these are the various things which we have done to ensure continuity, Anirban.
Sure, Rajiv, and I think it's extremely insightful how some of this is getting implemented in organizations, and frankly, a lot of areas around standardization of experience, around bite-sized learning. I think this is also going to stay, and as you rightly pointed out, is the silver lining. So maybe I'll just go back to the results of the poll because I see beyond point two, I think which we correctly anticipated. Um, in point one, which is about finding the new normal and right skills and competencies, I think that's a problem which has been identified by a significant chunk of the audience. So let me try and touch upon that topic a bit. So I think I spoke on this earlier, which is that this is a phase of skill discovery for organizations, right? So Rajiv, as you talked about, that in the short term, it might mean that what skills are important to succeed in a remote work environment, right? And in fact, at Mercer Metal, we are helping organizations, do that with some kind of a remote work readiness kind of a test, right? So you can actually gauge the readiness of your employees to succeed in a work from home scenario. But in the longer run, it actually might mean that organizations will lay more stress on some of the skills and competencies like maybe an empathy, managing stress, agility, and even communication, maybe, right? And this will go into uh, revisit or rewire some of the existing competency frameworks which are being used in organizations today. And if we think about it a bit, we see that this has got direct implication on developing the leadership pipe and also on the high potential identification frameworks, which organizations use today. So there is definitely going to be some rewriting of these competencies. If there is not a complete overhaul, but at least there should be a redistribution of weights to the various behavioral traits, which are important today. So maybe empathy and communication, maybe agility, all of these will get weighted more when we are trying to scout out our future leaders, when we are going to scout out high potentials within the organization. But this change is still at a competency framework level, and I think organizations have already started to understand that. But it is imperative that are you also able to test or assess for those competencies in a completely virtual setting? Because increasingly the standard modes of conducting such assessments would be an offline or maybe a blended assessment center which organizations sort of latched on for their junior, mid, or even senior leadership. But increasingly you know we are seeing a whole lot of migration happening from offline or even blended assessment centers to something that's completely virtual, right? I wanted to take a very recent example of this, and this is one of the, again, a legacy organization, one of the largest Indian consumer electrical equipment manufacturing companies, and they traditionally used to run only offline assessment centers. However, they wanted to switch to a complete virtual mode for conducting assessment centers for over 100 of their identified future leaders, because there was no way of actually even doing blended assessments. Assessors were not available, people could not be on the same locations. And the need was to conduct it in multiple languages. So they had English, they had Spanish, but they also wanted to ensure that with whatever tools they are using in a virtual assessment setting, um, are they also able to preserve the sanctity of the test? So which means the whole hog of proctoring facilities, about preventing any kind of unfair means during the assessment, about ensuring authenticity of the tests. So they used the AI driven proctoring solution on top of the virtual assessment centers to make sure that the initiative of high potential identification does not suffer. And at the same time, they're able to conduct it in an authentic fashion completely virtually. Now, this leg has been completed very successfully for the organization. But the next step is definitely for all of us who have participated or run assessment centers. We know that there is a feedback session. right, that follows the entire assessment process. And now the thought process is, can you also move this entire feedback process online through some scalable remote interview or collaboration platforms? So I think they are taking steps also in that direction. And we don't see this as an isolated incident, but something that can happen across, or rather is happening, across a whole range of industries and organizations. So I'll take a pause here and maybe Sukhmeet turn to you for your views, on some of these, best practices, and especially maybe around employee engagement.
Yeah, but before that, I completely echo with what you shared, and movement towards virtual assessment is happening across levels. Right, we are currently working with a leading MNC pharma organization. Again, on the top three brands, they used to do face-to-face assessments for the entry-level sales folks, movement to first-level managers and then to second-level managers, because they believe that the sales capability is most important and that will drive the organization's future success. So from a face-to-face mode, they move to completely virtual. Which tools to deploy? How do you do that? And they have the business leaders and HR folks co-assessing their folks. That used to be the norm during the face-to-face assessment. Now, how are you going to do that? Training those people, identifying the right set of tools, tool competency matrix, which competencies to give higher weightage, training the leaders. So a lot of movement is happening, not only in the pharma sector, but across sectors. And talking about employee engagement, I think Rajiv covered quite a few points. Leaders need to listen, need to be transparent, need to be real. I think that's most important. And I would say that technology is clearly an enabler. Today, we can do digital focus group discussions, and we've been doing this with our clients for over 500 employees coming together, crowdsourcing insights in a very exploratory environment, live polls, live results, all of that can be done. I would say pulse surveys are becoming common, right? People want to gauge, employers want to gauge employee sentiments, prioritize action items, and team and manager dialogues, ask me anything sessions, right? The one person who is actually supporting an employee today, the maximum is his peer network and the manager. But an important question to also ask is, how do you sustain this entire momentum, right? What happens over the next 3, 6, 12 months? I think all of us would have heard about TCS wanting to deploy 75% of their workforce for work from home within 2 years. So imagine the huge impact on the business, on the people, and the HR implications, right from engagement to L&D. And to some extent, Anirban, I also feel that engagement is not sufficiently predictive. It's getting morphed into employee experience. That's the buzzword, right? Look at the entire life cycle of an employee, all the moments that really matter in an employee's life cycle, right? Not just recruitment, but appraisal time, promotions, communication on around those elements. You have career conversations, giving feedback, developmental needs. So how do you really focus on the entire employee experience and energize that experience? Make it more effective, make it more digital, make it more efficient. That will be the crux, right? While you connect is important, listening is important, that will continue. But I think somewhere HR has to go back and think, how do we do things differently going forward, right? And you will have to do more with less because resources are going to be limited. So employee experience is going to be, will start becoming more critical, in my opinion.
Great. Thank you, Sukhmeet, for your views. I think, let's quickly turn to, the question and answers section. We have already, getting I think a flurry of questions in the Q&A box. I think one of them is interesting, and maybe, Rajiv, you would want to take that up. I think there's a question around that. Don't you think it's time that when we should leave the learning and reskilling to the individual himself? Most organizations have cut their L&D budgets. So I think, it's fairly interesting because I think to some extent we are doing that, but I think organizations are also enabling, that to happen effectively. So would love to hear your views on that, Rajiv.
Sure. In fact, irrespective whether organization is investing or not, whether we are in COVID-19 or not, our career is in our hand. Our learning is in our hand. We are the one who owns our own learning. And I always believe to the fact that while 70% of the learning we get on the job, 20% may come from the experiences in the organization with learning interventions, coaching, mentoring, and other interaction with the leadership team. But the 10% learning comes from the fact that what are we investing on our own self? And that has the exponential impact on the overall success for our journey. So 90% of success is driven by that 10%. I've seen in IT industry, there was for some period of time, reluctance for people to change and reskill and upskill themselves. If somebody was Java developer, would love to remain Java developer throughout the life. And if somebody would have asked that person and challenged that person to get into Angular JS or any other technology for that matter, would have not really shown interest in that. And in the process, what happened? Some of these vanilla technology took a backseat, while Java is a evergreen, and I would not actually link it with that way. But the bottom line is, if we are not investing on ourselves, if we are not reskilling ourselves, we will have a difficult situation in the times to come. So that's where it's a self-oriented goal, and we should not always look at the organization to enable it. If organization is doing it for you, you should be happy about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there are a couple of questions which has the same theme around how do or how does organizations ensure to sustain the motivation or the engagement levels in the lockdown situation. So I think we have covered the engagement piece quite a bit, but regarding keeping the employee motivation and morale high, what are the kinds of initiatives that organizations can take or employees themselves can take to be able to do that. So any views on that, Sukhmeet, Rajiv, either of you, please.
I thought I touched upon that. So over a period of time, you will have to continue your employee listening approaches. So you can look at digital focus groups, pulse surveys, one-on-one connects. That should continue. Today, a lot of companies are doing those physical, emotional, and social well-being programs. Right? Rajiv talked about quite a few. I've heard about Zumba classes, to counselors getting available, to dance classes, to quizzes. Some of this will continue, but I think you'll have to look at the bigger picture, which is engagement is not about short-term measures and about some of these interventions. It's about giving a holistic experience. So how do we make changes in our HR programs, policies, and make engagement more sustainable? So that has to be the focus. And maybe some out-of-the-box thinking needs to be done by HR teams, of course, given their respective context, industries, and business priorities, and then look at what can be done.
Sure, sure. So I think we'll have time for one more question. So I think I see, one which asks around, can you share some of this simulation that can be used for recruitment in your organizations? So I think, in my narration, I touched on this topic to a certain extent. So as I said, because we're moving from an offline to an online process, it does not mean the candidate experience needs to be compromised. So if you look at simulations, the entire idea of simulations is to mimic maybe a real life scenario where you're actually doing what you're supposed to do. And evaluate you in that process. So there are enough and more number of simulations today available, not only in technical side of things. So, if you are asking this question from a technical standpoint of how do you recruit maybe a programmer or a developer, there are enough and more technical simulations which are available where candidates can come and write a code and automatically get evaluated. You can have simulations on the business scenario as well. So for example, I talked about the case study simulator. So it is more of a gamified way of solving a case study. So you are given a case situation. How do you address different areas around it? How do you play the case, so to say, in an interactive fashion with the computer, and you automatically can get evaluated. And you can have multiple such simulations depending on the recruitment needs today. So I would encourage you to maybe go and look, for some of these solutions which are already available. And in most cases, we have found that the candidate experience is actually enhanced if you go and use some of those simulations in assessments. So I think that's all the time that we had for Q&A, and we will definitely get back to all the other participants who have asked your questions. The panel will answer that question, and we will get back to you once the webinar is over. But just before we conclude this session, and I think we've just got a couple of minutes, I wanted to turn individually to Sukhmeet first, and then maybe Rajiv, to just articulate maybe the two key takeaways for our participants, from this entire discussion that we have had. So Sukhmeet, maybe over to you first.
Okay. I would say you need to look at things doing differently, and HR needs to rise to the occasion for that. So winning with empathy is the mantra, and focus on the future. So two things would be race to reskill, and second would be energize the experience. So move from short-term engagement to a much broader concept.
Fantastic, fantastic. Rajiv, what are your
Yeah,
views?
I think I will actually bring two dimensions to it. One is people and the other is business. So one is we need to remain empathetic. We talked about a lot in terms of how do we be available to employees, connect with them, make them feel comfortable. This is a phase which will be over. People will remember how did you treat them during this stage. So that's one. From a business perspective, most of us are getting into a space which is not going to be very encouraging. So don't keep your eyes closed. Sometimes HR folks only look at one dimensional view. Balance it at well. Wherever you need to support organization to sustain the business, look at that as well and find ways, creative ways to deal with it. There would be many better ways through which you can resolve the issues than asking somebody to go. So look at both the dimensions well.
Great. So thanks, Rajiv. Thanks, Sukhmeet. Thanks very much for joining us, in this session. And
Thank
to
you.
everybody in the audience, we will have several such webinars and discussions, done from Mercer Metal. So do watch out for us, in this space, and we will make sure that we, respond to some of the queries which we could not answer, during the discussion. So thank you all for joining again, and thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Bye.